So something that I don't hear anyone talking about is investing or not investing in NFL organizations. So everyone gets so hyped up every year about the new rookies coming out, the talent, the opportunity, the offensive scheme, and they don't ever address or they completely dismiss the organization that the person is coming into. And so in this video, we're gonna identify like the bottom 5 organizations for fantasy football that you should absolutely avoid at all costs. There may be one exception in some cases, but in a lot of these cases, there's no exception. And the pattern has been going on for years. And so these are the bottom 5 organizations that you should be avoiding at all costs. Now, before we get into this, I want to show you just as a standard, a good organization, just so we have something to compare it to. So here we have Cincinnati's team. Right now, at this point in the season, like the top quarterbacks are a little over 300. I think Mahomes has like 330 something. So Burrow's right up there at 292. Your top wide receivers and running backs are around 250 fantasy points. And then your top tight ends are around 150 to 180. Joe Mixon, he's a little bit behind, but he did miss a game. T. Higgins is probably a good wide receiver 2. Jamar Chase is obviously your wide receiver 1, but he's missed a number of games. And then Tyler Boyd is serviceable as like a wide receiver 3 or 4. And then P. Ryan has been coming up as he's filled in for Joe Mixon. All right, so there's one example. Let's go to Kansas City. You got a quarterback that's at 330. You got a tight end that's at 238, absolute beast. And then Smith-Schuster, he's on the lower end, so he's like a wide receiver 3 or 4. And other than that, they don't really have a lot of guys that you can rely on. But those are a couple of examples of good teams. Let's discuss some of these bottom feeders. Number 1, the Houston Texans. So let's take a look at Houston. So look at what Houston has. They've got Dameon Pierce, who has had a number of good games. I mean, 18, 25, 20. I mean, he had a good stretch there. And then he just dropped right off. And he started off slow, which is to be expected for a rookie. But he's their top fantasy player at 143. Davis Mills is in his, second year? And he's at 138. You really wanted to see more of a jump from him in his second year. And then Brandon Cooks is like a wide receiver 5. Like there's very few weeks where you would actually start Brandon Cooks. And so that's for this season. If you went to last season, Cooks ended at 231. So that's probably wide receiver 3 territory. Mills was at 189. So he's like QB3, QB4 territory. And then like Burkhead was like a running back 5. And Collins was a non-factor last year. Very disappointing. Let's go to 2020. And again, Cooks finished serviceable, wide receiver 3, maybe possibly 2 type points, and then it just falls right off. Houston, if you've got a top prospect going to Houston in the draft next year, you really want to temper your excitement. Their offensive line, their coaching, and it's more than that. With these organizations, it's the organization. Just as a reference point, back in the early 90s, the Celtics were owned by Paul Gaston Jr., and he was completely hands-off of the organization. He was not into basketball at all. He viewed it as just a business venture, and it showed. That viewpoint trickled down to the court. And this was the years of like Rick Pitino. This is like the dark times for the Celtics. But that's the effect that ownership who's not really committed to the sports end of the team, how that affects the team. And so you've got these players coming into these organizations and they have a legacy of losing. And there is such thing as a loser's mentality. People get used to losing. Just like there's a ritual and there's a protocol and there's a routine to winning and being champions, there's such a thing for those that are perennial losers. This will affect the players on the team if they're in these organizations for extended periods of time. They get used to the lifestyle of losing, and it's contagious, just like winning is. And this is what you find with these types of organizations. So Houston is probably the worst organization in the NFL. Number 2, the Detroit Lions. So I just said that Houston was the worst. Detroit's right there. I mean, just decades long of putridness. And so you look at the players up for this year. Goff is at 201 points. So he's a QB3 territory. He's just inconsistent at the beginning of the year. I mean, they were the top offense for the first 4 weeks of the year. And then look, it just boom, 6 points, 3 points. And then he comes back 20, 15, 16, and then 6, and then 21. So again, it's like, why? Is it just because it's the Detroit Lions? I remember Calvin Johnson talking about after he had been on the Lions for some time, he visited one of his friends in another organization, and the vending machines for the players were free. They didn't have to pay anything. He's like, really? He's like, they provide that for you? Like it was just an amenity. And so that was completely foreign to him to have the organization care for their players in that way. And so this is what we're talking about with a losing culture. You got Goff is number 1, at least that's right. Like he should be the number 1. Amon-Ra St. Brown is at 168. So he's having a pretty good year, but you see that inconsistency, these huge numbers, then some really subpar numbers, and now he's bouncing back a little bit. This does not surprise me. Jamal Williams is actually ahead of DeAndre Swift in fantasy points. And as an aside, get rid of DeAndre Swift. I have him on one of my teams, and you kind of stuck with him because people aren't going to give you a lot of value for him. Like if you can get a first-round pick for him, that's great value. I would do that in a second and just be done with him. I'd rather have Jamal Williams on my team than DeAndre Swift. And here's why. Jamal Williams is the goal line back. And so in one play, boom, he can get you 6 points. Now, in order for Swift to accomplish that, he has to run 60 yards or he has to make 3 catches for 30 yards. So, 3 10-yard catches. So that could take a whole quarter to accumulate those points or even a whole half the way that the offense runs in Detroit. So I'd rather have Jamal Williams than DeAndre Swift and have Williams as like my RB3 or 4 and use him to fill in on bye weeks. Because he will put up big numbers. He'll put up big days. I mean, look at this. He's putting up 16, 24, 23, 22, and then he's got his average subpar days. But look at 24, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks where he's above 20 points. Look at DeAndre Swift. One week where he's above 20 points. And so this is an example of a player that has so much hype, and yet what is dragging him down? It's the organization he's in. What if DeAndre Swift was on Cincinnati? What if he was on Dallas? What if he was on Kansas City? Even if he was on Seattle, they would be utilizing his talents. And so I believe it's because it's the Detroit Lions. And then after that, it just falls off the table, and you don't really want any of these guys on your team. Number 3, the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is a case where there is that one exception, and it's Nick Chubb. Now, you could make the argument for Amari Cooper as well. Jacoby Brissett, for him to be kind of like a journeyman and to always be filling in for someone who's injured, he's a pretty good quarterback. And his career has borne that out. When he filled in Miami, when he filled in New England, he's been pretty good. But Chubb is an elite. Chubb is a second-round running back. He really should go in the first round. He should edge out some of these big names like Barkley, Swift. He should go ahead of these guys. Even you could make the case for him over CMC. There's very few running backs that should go ahead of him. I skipped over him in the second round or the third round this year, and it was a mistake. Like he's just excellent. They have an excellent offensive line. Now, Amari Cooper and Brissett, they definitely have a chemistry, and Cooper is an established, very professional wide receiver in the NFL. He can run all different routes. He can go deep. He can run over the middle. He can be a possession receiver. He can be a goal line threat. So he's big, he's strong, he's fast. He can have some really big games. He's got 5 games over 20 points. I mean, Amari's really, really good. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's a serviceable wide receiver 4. He's good to fill in on your bye weeks and such. And then Kareem Hunt, I think he's a little overhyped. I think if he was a lead back, I don't know how well he would do. And of course you have Njoku, who is talented, but why is he under 100 points? He's got some weeks where he's 1.6 points, 8 points. He missed a couple games, 3 points. So maybe if he hadn't missed those couple games, he'd be up around 120-ish, somewhere around there, 125. But then again, the rest of these guys you really don't want on your team. It's just the Cleveland Browns are perennially, they don't, you watch, when you play fantasy football long enough, you watch these teams and you just see how they continue to make bad decisions and mess things up. From the drafting of Johnny Manziel to just how things deteriorated with Baker Mayfield. They had made the playoffs with Mayfield, and it's why did things deteriorate? He got hurt at the end of the season last year. He played through it into the playoffs, or this might have been 2 years ago. Why did he end up not on the team? And so as of this video, we're waiting for Deshaun Watson to come back, and it's everyone's all geeked up about it to see how this is going to be an awesome team. Don't count on it. Look at Deshaun Watson himself. The guy's a mess. So he fits right into the culture. So you really have to temper your expectations with the Cleveland Browns. They're just always terrible. And what is the reason for that? It has to come from the top, and it starts from the top and it trickles down. Number 4, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we could not make this list without including the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's look at the totals for this year. So Trevor Lawrence, he's starting to emerge. We're really starting to see him emerge. It would be nice to see him not fumble the ball so much, but 2, 4, 5, 6 interceptions, that's pretty good this year for him. He's cut down on that. And you're starting to see more consistency in his numbers, and I think we will continue to see that. He definitely has a good chemistry with Kirk and with Zay Jones. He relies on them. Etienne had some good games once he came back. This is a good run right here. 14, 12, 19, 25, 26, and then 10, and then he got hurt. So they have a good core. But when you look back, let's look at last season. So you've got Lawrence at 224. Those are good numbers. Christian Kirk at 170. The top wide receivers right now are at around 250. So he's right around wide receiver 3 territory, and then Jones is wide receiver 4 territory. If we look at last year, Kirk finished over 200 points, so that's around wide receiver 3 territory. And there wasn't a whole lot after that. So Lawrence is almost at his total for all of last year. And we're in, this is week 13, has yet to be played. So you are seeing his talent and his potential starting to come to fruition. And then if you look back at the 2020 season, Ridley was on Atlanta, so that doesn't count. Marvin Jones had a good season, and Kirk was coming up. Evan Ingram had probably a good tight end 2 type numbers, and Henderson was not on the team. This is really a bad organization, and it's kind of like the laughingstock of the NFL. But I do think that maybe out of all of the teams that we're discussing, this one actually has the most potential. particularly because they have their franchise quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. So I would invest in Trevor Lawrence. I actually traded a first round pick for him right before the deadline this year, and it's a QB superflex league. So I already have Brady and Geno Smith as my two quarterbacks. I'm looking forward to seeing him improve so that I can get him into my lineup for the playoffs. Number 5, the New York Jets. Oh, the Jets. The Jets, the Jets, the Jets, the Jets. So you look at this, and Garrett Wilson just... You should be, if you have any Jets players, you should be celebrating the fact that Zach Wilson is not the quarterback anymore. And hope and pray that he does not get the starting job again. He is not a good leader. When I read his snide comments about Joe Flacco and his age, immediately I identified that as poor leadership. Just a terrible leadership and no leadership skills. To publicly, as one of the skills of a leader is to praise in public, criticize in private. And so to criticize someone who has been a Super Bowl MVP, has won a Super Bowl, Flacco might have multiple Super Bowls, but to disrespect someone like that publicly told me that Zach Wilson is an absolute loser when it comes to being a leader and a football player. So Garrett Wilson has suffered, and the fact that Mike White, I don't care if it's Mike White or Joe Flacco, I want either one of them as quarterback over Zach Wilson, and you'll see Garrett Wilson flourish because of that. And he did. He had 8 targets, 5 catches, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns with Mike White. Breece Hall has all the talent in the world, so can he stay healthy? We don't know. So we got to wait till next year. The rest of them, there's really not much here. There's not much depth, and the Jets are just, again, one of the laughing stocks of the league year in and year out. You have to temper your expectations with any player that's drafted. I don't care how talented they are. I traded Garrett Wilson in one league, in this league that I'm showing you. I traded him for Kenneth Walker straight up because X-Wings loves Garrett Wilson. And I'm very happy with that trade. Very happy with that trade. But look, I mean, Elijah Moore, just bust. Just really, really a bust. Corey Davis, I don't know, just can't stay healthy and just is not a consistent, reliable performer. And James Robinson has fallen down a pit since he got traded here. Michael Carter is okay, but look at his numbers. There's just not a lot going on here. Now, these are like my bottom 5. I'm going to show you 2 teams that are actually very surprising that you wouldn't think. And one is Tennessee. Other than Derrick Henry, I mean, Derrick Henry's a first-round draft pick every year. I don't care what the format is. But after that, I mean, look at these numbers. Ryan Tannehill, 140 fantasy points, and then no one's even close to 100. Burks was so hyped up at the beginning of this year because of the opportunity. With A.J. Brown gone, he's going to be the number 1. And, I mean, look how long it's taken for him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 weeks. And finally, in week 11, in week 11, he finally emerges, and then he has another 17-point game. But one of those, 6 of those points was a fumble. Derrick Henry fumbled right before he got to the goal line, and he recovered it in the end zone. Burks did. So that was, accounted for 6 of his points. So I'm not completely sold on Treylon Burks. So this is very surprising that Tennessee just has an anemic offense. And Robert Woods, just gross. You don't want him on your team. You really don't. He's just so unreliable. Russell Wilson has just been terrible this year. 150 fantasy points, and then Cortland Sutton's at 127. So he's like a wide receiver 4 or 5. I mean, Judy's a bust. Gordon's a bust. Latavius Murray has shown signs of goodness in his role. But again, he's probably a RB3 at best. And then the rest of them, I mean, Russell Wilson has shown that he got a little bit of chemistry with Dulcich, but Javonte Williams can't stay healthy. So so far he's been a bust. Hamler, total bust. This team, like, I don't want to own anybody from the Denver Broncos. I don't want to own anybody from Tennessee. I don't want to own anybody from Washington. I mean, McLaurin, maybe. This team, like, you really should avoid them. And if you're getting trade offers, think very carefully before you accept them. We're at this time of the season where people are starting to, the divide between the buyers and the sellers are starting to becoming more clear, and people's seasons are starting to be lost. Their playoff hopes are starting to be dashed. And so they're starting to look ahead to the future. As you look ahead to the draft coming up, bear in mind the organizations that are going to be drafting and where players are landing. Here's the problem. You might say, well, aren't all of these organizations usually at the top of the draft, drafting all the best talent? Yes, that's the problem. You've got all this talent that comes in and gets wasted because there's poor coaching, poor ownership. Unless it's like a franchise type quarterback that's getting drafted, those are really the only players that can turn an organization around. So you think about like a Kyler Murray or a Lamar Jackson. But in Lamar Jackson's case, he's got a good team around him, good defense and good coaching. In Kyler Murray's case, there is a good level of coaching to his strength. So, but they have to get the auxiliary pieces to help them, whether that's offensive line, running backs, or wide receivers, or a tight end. Keep these things in mind when you're drafting your rookies. Temper your expectations, and if you see that there's talented guys, but I mean, look at it this year. Drake London goes to Atlanta. He's not doing great. Olave goes to New Orleans. He's doing all right. Garrett Wilson goes to the Jets. It's been spotty. There's been flashes of hope, though. Jameson Williams has been injured, but he's in Detroit. Tyler Algier goes to Atlanta. And despite a run-heavy scheme, he hasn't really flourished. Dameon Pierce goes to Houston. He's fallen off a cliff. But you look at someone like Kenneth Walker, goes to Seattle with good coaching, a good scheme, run-heavy scheme, and when he gets the opportunity, he flourishes. It's very interesting. Breece Hall goes to the Jets. He gets injured. You've got to look at the patterns that keep repeating themselves, and you have to ask yourself, do I want to continue? Do I want to invest in that? What reason do I have to believe that that pattern is going to change? And with these organizations, they are losers at their core. What really is going to change that? In the case of like the New England Patriots, ownership changed. And you had Bob Kraft, who was not afraid to get rid of Bill Parcells and to bring in his coach. And now you had this dynamic team of ownership and coaching, and then they got the quarterback. If you'd like to wear the gear that I'm wearing, check the links below. Click on them, and it'll take you right to the page, and you can get set up just like I am. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.